The lecture hall of the Galactic Institute of Xenoanthropology stretched across what would be 3 football fields on Earth. Crystalline walls refracted the light of distant stars, casting prismatic patterns across rows of seats occupied by beings from 47 different species. At the podium stood Professor Veldar, a Korvathian whose translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that reflected his emotional state, currently a steady amber of professional confidence. Welcome, colleagues, to the 847th Annual Symposium on Death World Species, Veldar announced, his voice carried through neural translation fields. Today's presentation will challenge everything you believe you understand about survivability, adaptation, and what the galactic community has come to call the human problem. A ripple of interest moved through the audience. Humans had been a source of fascination and, frankly, bewilderment since their species had stumbled into galactic society 12 years ago. They had arrived in a ship held together by what they called duct tape and prayers, having somehow survived a catastrophic warp drive malfunction that should have scattered their atoms across 3 solar systems. Professor Zixana, of relics whose 6 compound eyes could process information across 17 different light spectra, raised one of her 4 arms. Veldar, forgive my interruption, but isn't this topic somewhat exhausted? We've had 17 papers on humans in the last 3 cycles alone. Exhausted? Veldar's skin flashed a quick magenta of amusement. My dear Zixana, we've barely scratched the surface. In fact, I've spent the last standard year embedded at what humans call universities across their planet. What I discovered. He paused for effect. What I discovered is that we've been asking the wrong questions entirely. The lecture hall's environmental controls adjusted as more attendees leaned forward, their various respiratory systems creating a symphony of anticipation. Veldar activated the holographic display, and the image of a blue-green planet materialized above the podium, Earth, rotating slowly, deceptively peaceful. Let me begin with what should have been our first clue, Veldar continued. Every single educational module about Earth's history, every lesson plan their children study, every historical text, they all end the same way. He paused, letting the tension build. With survivors. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs? Survivors. The Ice Age? Survivors. Plagues that killed half their population? Survivors. World wars that reshaped continents? Survivors. Climate catastrophes, volcanic eruptions, floods that drowned civilizations. His skin pulsed with each word, survivors, survivors, survivors. A then next professor in the 3rd row, her chitinous plates clicking with agitation, interjected, but surely this is standard evolutionary pressure? All species face extinction events. Standard? Veldar's laugh was translated as a harmonious chime. Let me share what I learned from a human history professor named Dr. Sarah Martinez at Stanford University in California. The hologram shifted to show a recording, a small human female with dark hair tied back, standing before a classroom of young humans. Her eyes held an intensity that made several alien observers unconsciously shift in their seats. Class, Dr. Martinez's voice filled the hall. Today we're going to discuss the Toba catastrophe, approximately 75,000 years ago. A supervolcanic eruption that blocked out the sun, dropped global temperatures by 15 degrees Celsius, and reduced the human population to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. Humanity was closer to extinction than any species should be able to survive. She smiled, that peculiar baring of teeth that humans use to express pleasure, which still unnerved most alien species. But here's the fascinating part, DNA evidence suggests that this near-extinction created a genetic bottleneck that actually increased our cooperation, our ability to work together, our drive to survive. We didn't just endure the catastrophe. We evolved because of it. The recording paused, and Veldar turned back to his audience. Do you understand what she's teaching? To children, no less. She's teaching them that catastrophe made them stronger. That near extinction was an advantage. Professor Krell, a massive Gordanian whose species had evolved on a garden world with optimal conditions, rumbled his skepticism. This is psychological conditioning. They're preparing their young for hardship through historical mythology. That's what I thought initially, Veldar admitted, his skin cycling through thoughtful greens and blues. So I attended more classes. History, biology, literature, even their mathematics courses. And I found the pattern everywhere. He pulled up another recording, this time of a biology lecture. A human male with graying hair and an infectious enthusiasm gestured at a holographic display of DNA strands. The thing about Earth, the professor was saying, is that life here has survived 5 major mass extinctions. 5 times, 75% or more of all species have been wiped out. And yet, life didn't just persist, it exploded into even greater diversity afterward. The survivors adapted, evolved, filled every possible niche. Earth doesn't create species that merely survive. It creates species that thrive in the aftermath. Veldar stopped the recording. I interviewed this professor, Dr. James Chen, after his lecture. I asked him why he emphasized survival so heavily. Do you know what he told me? The lecture hall was silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems. He said, because that's what life does. It survives. And if you're from Earth, you're descended from the absolute best at it. Every single one of your ancestors survived long enough to reproduce, going back billions of years. You're the result of an unbroken chain of survivors facing an apocalypse of a planet. That's not something to take lightly. Veldar's skin pulsed with the violet of profound realization. An apocalypse of a planet. Those were his exact words. Not a garden world, not a hospitable cradle, an apocalypse. And they wear it as a badge of honor. He advanced to the next slide, showing a human literature class. The professor, an elderly woman with laugh lines around her eyes, was reading from a book. We survivors are the lucky ones, she read. We are the ones who get to tell the story, to bear witness, to carry on. But we're also the ones burdened with remembering, with ensuring it never happens again, and with the knowledge that we made it when others didn't. The human professor looked up at her students. This is from Night by Elie Wiesel, a survivor of the Holocaust, one of humanity's darkest chapters. Notice the weight he places on the word survivor. It's not just about living through something. It's about responsibility, memory, and purpose. Veldar stopped the recording. Their literature is filled with this concept. Survival narratives aren't just common, they're the dominant genre. Dystopian futures, post-apocalyptic wastelands, zombie outbreaks, alien invasions, climate collapse, humans consume these stories voraciously. They entertain themselves by imagining worst-case scenarios and then figuring out how to survive them. A Peltharian scholar, whose species had achieved spaceflight without ever experiencing a major war, spoke up. This seems pathological. Are they not traumatized by their own history? That's the extraordinary part, Veldar responded, his skin brightening with excitement. They're not traumatized, they're inspired. I attended a physics lecture where the professor was discussing faster-than-light travel. A student asked about the dangers of warp field collapse. The professor's response was, well, we'll figure it out. Humans have survived worse. He pulled up more footage. This phrase appears everywhere. In engineering classes facing impossible problems, humans have survived worse. In medical schools discussing incurable diseases, we've survived worse. In political science classes debating global crises, humanity has survived worse. The lecture hall buzzed with confused discussion. Zixana's compound eyes whirred as she processed this information. But, this is irrational. Past survival doesn't guarantee future survival. That's basic statistical reasoning. You're applying logic, Veldar countered. Humans don't survive on logic alone, they survive on something they call determination, or grit, or sometimes just spite. I interviewed a human graduate student in environmental science named Marcus Rodriguez. His planet is facing climate change that could devastate their coastal cities. I asked him if he was afraid of what the future might bring. The hologram showed a young human male with tired eyes but a set jaw. Afraid? Marcus said. Sure. But my ancestors survived the voyage across the Atlantic in wooden boats. They survived colonization, slavery, discrimination, poverty. My grandmother survived a hurricane that destroyed her entire village. You think rising sea levels are going to stop us? We'll build walls, or we'll build boats, or we'll grow gills if we have to. That's what humans do. We survive. He said this with complete sincerity, Veldar noted. The biological impossibility of growing gills didn't even register as an obstacle in his mind. Because humans have a fundamental belief that they'll find a way. Anyway. Professor Krell shifted his massive bulk. This still doesn't explain why their educational system emphasizes it so heavily. Surely they could teach history without this constant refrain of survivors. Could they? Veldar challenged. I thought the same thing, so I proposed exactly that to Dr. Martinez, the history professor. I suggested that perhaps they could focus on human achievements rather than human endurance. Do you know what she said? He didn't wait for an answer. She said, Professor Veldar, our achievements are our endurance. We built civilizations in deserts, on tundra, on volcanic islands, in flood plains. We created art during plagues, made scientific discoveries during wars, wrote poetry in concentration camps. The achievement isn't separate from the survival, it's part of it. We don't just survive. We survive and thrive. We survive and create. We survive and love. The survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. The lecture hall fell into contemplative silence. Veldar could see his colleagues reassessing their understanding, their skin, scales, and various epidermises reflecting the complex emotions of their species. I have one more recording to share, Veldar said quietly. This is from a kindergarten class. These are human children aged 5 Earth years. Watch carefully. The hologram showed a small human female, barely larger than a sitting Peltharian, standing before her class. Her lesson was about dinosaurs, the massive reptilian species that had dominated Earth before the asteroid strike. And then, the tiny teacher said with the exaggerated enthusiasm humans used with young children, a really big rock from space hit the Earth. And it made the dinosaurs go extinct. Can anyone tell me what extinct means? A small hand shot up. It means they all died. That's right, the teacher confirmed. All the dinosaurs died. But do you know what didn't die? The children leaned forward, enraptured. The little mammals, the tiny furry creatures living in burrows. They survived. And do you know what they eventually became? Us, several children shouted in unison. Exactly. The teacher beamed. We're the descendants of the survivors. And that's pretty amazing, isn't it? The recording ended. Veldar's skin pulsed with a deep orange, the Corvathian expression of profound understanding. They teach this to 5-year-olds, he said softly. They teach children that they are descended from survivors, that survival is in their DNA, that no matter what happens, life finds a way. By the time these humans reach adulthood, they've internalized a worldview where survival isn't just expected, it's inevitable. Where catastrophe isn't the end of the story, it's the inciting incident. He advanced to his final slide, a simple text document, a syllabus from an Earth university. This is from a course called Human Resilience Through History. Every major university on Earth offers some variation of it. The course description reads, an examination of how human societies have responded to existential threats throughout history, from natural disasters to human-made catastrophes, and how these experiences have shaped modern human civilization. Veldar looked out at his audience. Every major University. They have institutionalized the study of survival. They've made it academic, scholarly, respectable. They've turned catastrophe into curriculum. Zixana stood, all four of her arms gesturing in the Vrelic's expression of confused wonder. But why? What's the purpose? What are they preparing for? Veldhar's skin cycled through a rainbow of emotions before settling on a steady crimson, the color of absolute certainty. Everything, he said simply. They're preparing for everything. Because on Earth, everything has already happened. And whatever comes next, whether it's climate change, or asteroid strikes, or alien invasions, or cosmic rays, or entropy itself, he paused, letting his words sink in. There will be survivors. Because that's what humans do. That's what Earth teaches. That's what every lesson, every story, every historical text reinforces: we survive. The lecture hall erupted in discussion, dozens of species voicing their opinions, concerns, and theories. But Veldhar wasn't finished. Colleagues, he called out, waiting for silence. I've shown you their education system. Tomorrow, I'll show you something even more remarkable: what happens when you take these survivors and give them access to galactic technology. What happens when beings who've spent their entire evolutionary history overcoming impossible odds suddenly find themselves in a galaxy that thought it had seen everything? His skin flashed a warning red. What happens when the survivors meet the unprepared? The second day of the symposium drew an even larger crowd. Word had spread through the Galactic Institute about Veldhar's presentation, and the lecture hall was now packed beyond capacity. Beings clustered in doorways, hovered near ceiling supports, and connected remotely through neural links from across the station. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Professor Veldhar stood at the podium, his bioluminescent skin cycling through welcoming blues and greens. Beside him stood a being that caused a visible ripple of surprise through the audience: a human. She was tall by human standards, with skin the color of deep earth and hair woven into intricate braids that defied the station's artificial gravity. She wore the simple jumpsuit of a civilian contractor, but she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in their own skin. Colleagues, Veldhar began, allow me to introduce Dr. Keisha Washington, human xenobiologist and one of the lead researchers on the Human Galactic Integration Project. She's graciously agreed to help me with today's presentation. Dr. Washington smiled, that unsettling display of teeth, and waved. Good morning, everyone. Or good cycle. Or good existence. I'm still figuring out the proper greetings for 47 different species. A scattered sound that might have been laughter rippled through the audience. Veldhar's skin pulsed with warm amber. Yesterday, I showed you how Earth's education system teaches survival as a fundamental principle. Today, Dr. Washington and I will demonstrate what happens when this philosophy meets galactic society. Keisha, would you like to start with the incident? The incident, Dr. Washington said with a wry smile. Right. So, about 6 months after humanity joined the galactic community, there was what the Galactic Council officially termed a minor diplomatic misunderstanding. Humans call it Tuesday. She activated a holographic display showing a massive space station, the Kelver Trade Hub, one of the largest commercial centers in the sector. The Kelver Hub suffered a catastrophic power failure due to a solar flare interaction with their magnetic shielding. The station lost gravity, life support started failing, and they had approximately 4 hours before the atmospheric processors would completely shut down. Professor Krell rumbled from the audience. I remember this incident. The Kelver evacuation protocols were exemplary. All personnel were safely removed to transport ships within 3 hours. All Kelver personnel, Dr. Washington corrected. But there were also 17 humans on the station, traders, mostly, along with 2 human engineers who were consulting on a completely unrelated matter. The Kelver evacuation protocols didn't account for humans because, well, we were new. The evacuation ships were already full, and the next wave wouldn't arrive for 6 hours. She pulled up footage from the station's security cameras. The chaos was evident, beings of various species floating in zero gravity, emergency lights strobing, the clear signs of system failure everywhere. The Kelver station manager, a being named Thresh Kal, explained the situation to the humans. He was, by all accounts, genuinely apologetic. He expected panic, demands, anger. Dr. Washington's smile grew wider. Instead, one of the human engineers, a woman named Rebecca Chen, asked him 3 questions. Do you have a maintenance shuttle? Do you have spare parts? Do you have a toolkit? Veldhar's skin flashed with amusement. I interviewed Thresh Kal personally. He said it was the most confusing moment of his career. Here was a species he'd been told was dangerously unpredictable, facing certain death, and they were asking about tools. The security footage continued. A human figure, presumably Rebecca Chen, could be seen floating through the corridors, collecting other humans. Within minutes, they'd gathered in what appeared to be a maintenance bay. Rebecca explained her plan. Dr. Washington continued. The Kelver power systems were fried beyond quick repair, but the station had backup solar panels that weren't being utilized because the connection relays had been damaged by the flare. The humans proposed manually rerouting power from those panels through the maintenance shuttle systems, essentially turning the shuttle into a temporary power generator. Zixana's compound eyes whirred with calculation. That's actually possible. Inefficient and dangerous, but possible. However, it would require someone to spacewalk in the middle of a solar storm, manually rewire the connection points, and do so without proper safety protocols or support systems. Exactly, Dr. Washington confirmed. Thresh Kal explained all of this to Rebecca. He told her it was suicide. He said the radiation alone would be lethal, and that was assuming the structural integrity of the external hull wasn't compromised by microfractures, which it probably was. She paused for effect. Rebecca's response, and I quote, "So you're saying there's a chance?" A confused murmur ran through the audience. Professor Krell spoke up. I don't understand. She acknowledged it was suicide but proceeded anyway. That's not survival, that's the opposite. That's what Thresh Kal thought too, Veldhar interjected. But then Rebecca explained human mathematics to him. She said, if we do nothing, we have a 100% chance of dying. If we try this, we have maybe a 40% chance of dying. Where I come from, 60% odds are pretty good. Dr. Washington pulled up more footage. 2 human figures in improvised radiation suits, really just maintenance suits with extra shielding duct tape to critical areas, were working on the exterior of the station. The solar storm was visible in the background, a terrifying display of charged particles and radiation. That's Rebecca and Marcus Liu, the other human engineer, she narrated. They worked for 2 hours in conditions that should have killed them in 20 minutes. The radiation exposure they endured would have been immediately fatal to most species. Humans can take more radiation because Earth's atmosphere is thinner than most habitable worlds, and because we evolved dealing with more background radiation. But this was still well beyond safe levels. The footage showed the moment the lights came back on throughout the station. Gravity returned, life support systems hummed back to life, and the floating debris slowly settled. They saved the station, Dr. Washington said simply. All 17 humans survived. Rebecca and Marcus spent a week in medical treatment for radiation poisoning, but they recovered fully. The Kelver awarded them their highest civilian honor. But, Veldhar added, his skin pulsing with that warning crimson again, the story doesn't end there. Because the Galactic Council wanted to understand what had happened. They convened a special committee to investigate this reckless behavior. He pulled up official-looking documents. The council was concerned that humans had violated safety protocols, had endangered themselves unnecessarily, and had taken action without proper authorization. They worried that this represented a pattern of dangerous behavior that could spread to other species. Dr. Washington laughed, a sharp, slightly bitter sound. They wanted us to promise not to do it again. To follow proper evacuation protocols in the future, even if it meant accepting death. They said it was about maintaining order, preventing chaos, respecting established systems. And what did the humans say? A voice called from the audience, a then Nix professor whose species valued rules and structure above all else. We said no, Dr. Washington replied flatly. We explained that humans don't accept death gracefully when there's even a small chance of survival. We don't follow protocols that guarantee our demise just because they're established. We don't respect systems that value order over life. She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. We told them that we're survivors. It's literally in our DNA, in our education, in our culture. And if that makes us uncomfortable to have around, if that disrupts your orderly galaxy, then maybe your galaxy needs a little disruption. The lecture hall erupted in discussion, some species outraged, others intrigued, many simply confused. Veldar waited for the noise to die down before continuing. This incident led to what humans call the integration debates, he explained. For the past 12 years, the Galactic Council has been trying to figure out what to do with humanity. They can't expel them, humans haven't technically broken any laws. They can't ignore them, humans keep solving problems that the Council considers unsolvable. And they can't control them, because humans simply don't think the way the rest of us do. He pulled up a series of case files. Let me give you more examples. On Vrelix Prime, a mining accident trapped 47 workers 3 kilometers underground. The rescue operation was estimated to take 6 weeks, far longer than the trapped miners could survive. The Galactic Mining Guild had begun funeral preparations when 3 human mining consultants showed up with a plan. Zixana's compound eyes focused sharply. I remember this. Those humans, they used controlled explosives to create a new shaft. The vibrations could have caused a complete collapse. But they didn't, Dr. Washington countered. Because the humans calculated exactly where to place the charges, exactly how much force to use, and exactly when to detonate them. They rescued all 47 miners in 72 hours. The Mining Guild tried to fine them for unauthorized use of explosives. The miners they saved gave them a parade. Veldar continued through the files. On Gordonia, a plague outbreak threatened to wipe out an entire colony. The quarantine protocols called for complete isolation until the disease burned itself out, even if that meant everyone in the colony died. A human medical team broke quarantine, exposed themselves to the disease, studied it, and developed a treatment in 4 days. 4 days, Professor Krell rumbled. That's impossible. Disease research takes months, years even. Not when failure means death, Dr. Washington said quietly. Not when you're motivated by survival. The lead researcher, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, told me later that she didn't sleep for those 4 days. She said, sleep when you're dead. We're not dead yet. And then there's my personal favorite, Veldar said, his skin flashing with genuine amusement. The Peltharian food crisis. A Peltharian scholar stood up, their triangular head tilting in concern. Please, Professor Veldar. That was a sensitive situation. It was, Veldar agreed gently. Your planet suffered a blight that destroyed 80% of your staple crop. Your people were facing famine. The Galactic Agricultural Consortium said the blight was incurable and recommended immediate evacuation of your planet. But the humans, the Peltharian scholar said softly, they said they'd seen it before. Dr. Washington nodded. The Irish potato famine, the Dust Bowl, the Bengal famine, humans have faced agricultural collapse multiple times in our history. We knew what it looked like, and we knew that giving up wasn't an option. A team of human agricultural scientists worked with your farmers to develop resistant crop strains, implement crop rotation, and introduce supplementary food sources. They saved our world, the Peltharian scholar said, their voice thick with emotion. They saved billions of lives. And when we asked them why they would help a species they barely knew, one of the scientists, a young man named Tomás Ferreira, he said something I'll never forget. The scholar paused, composing themselves. He said, because we know what it's like to starve. We know what it's like to watch your children go hungry. And we know what it's like to survive anyway. We're not going to let you go through that alone when we can help. The lecture hall was silent. Even the ambient sound seemed muted. Veldar let the moment breathe before continuing. This is what I discovered during my year on Earth. Humans don't just survive for themselves, they carry that survival instinct into everything they do. They see a problem, they see beings in danger, and their immediate response is, how do we survive this? How do we all survive this? He pulled up one final recording. It showed a human classroom, a university lecture on what appeared to be ethics or philosophy. The professor was an older human male with kind eyes and weathered skin. The question isn't whether we can save everyone, the professor was saying. The question is whether we'll try. Because trying is what separates us from entropy. Trying is what evolution selected for. Every single one of you is descended from beings who tried when the odds were impossible, who fought when the fight seemed lost, who survived when survival seemed like a fantasy. He looked directly at his students. And yes, sometimes trying fails. Sometimes the brave die and the cowards live. Sometimes the universe doesn't care about your courage or determination. But here's the thing, the universe never cares. The universe is indifferent. So the only thing that matters is what we care about, what we choose to value, what we decide is worth fighting for. The professor smiled gently. We are survivors. But being a survivor isn't just about staying alive, it's about choosing what you're willing to survive for. Your ancestors survived famines, plagues, wars, and catastrophes because they believed the future was worth surviving for. Because they believed you were worth surviving for. Don't waste that gift by playing it safe. Don't dishonor that sacrifice by accepting defeat before the battle's even begun. The recording ended. Veldar's skin cycled through complex patterns of emotion, respect, concern, wonder, and something that might have been fear. Do you understand now? He asked his colleagues. Do you see why every human lesson ends with survivors? Because it's not just about the past. It's about the future. It's about teaching the next generation that giving up is never the answer, that impossible just means difficult, that death is negotiable if you're creative enough. Dr. Washington stepped forward. My ancestors survived the Middle Passage, the horrific voyage that brought enslaved Africans to the Americas. They survived centuries of slavery, segregation, discrimination. They survived because they believed that someday, somehow, their descendants would be free. Would thrive. Would reach the stars. She looked around the lecture hall, meeting the eyes of dozens of different species. And here I am. Standing on an alien space station, speaking to beings from across the galaxy. My ancestors couldn't have imagined this. But they survived so that I could be here. So I owe it to them to keep surviving, to keep trying, to keep fighting for a better future. And that's why humans make the rest of the galaxy nervous, Veldar concluded. Because we have entire civilizations that have never faced an existential threat. Species that evolved on perfect worlds, that developed technology in peace, that joined the galactic community without ever knowing real hardship. And then humans show up, battle-scarred and trauma-forged, and we start solving problems that everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. Professor Krell stood, his massive form towering over the podium. But is this sustainable? Can humans maintain this intensity indefinitely? What happens when they finally face a problem they can't solve? When they encounter something that truly is impossible? Dr. Washington and Veldar exchanged a look. She shrugged. Then we die. But we'll die trying. And if even one human survives, they'll learn from what killed us, they'll adapt, they'll evolve, and they'll make sure it doesn't kill the next generation. She paused, then added with a slight smile, besides, we haven't found that truly impossible problem yet. And humanity's been looking for 12,000 years of recorded history. We've gotten pretty good at turning impossible into difficult into done. Veldar brought up one last image, a photograph from Earth. It showed a small plaque attached to a spacecraft, the Voyager probe, humanity's first attempt at interstellar travel. This is a message humans sent into space long before they knew anyone was out here listening, he explained. It's a golden record containing sounds and images from Earth, meant to introduce humanity to any aliens who might find it. The record includes music, greetings in multiple languages, and images of human life. He zoomed in on the plaque's inscription. But look at what they chose to write on the spacecraft itself: to the makers of music, all worlds, all times. Veldar's skin pulsed with deep purple, the Korvathian expression of profound respect. They sent this message assuming that somewhere, somehow, there were other beings. Other survivors. Other species that had looked up at the stars and wondered. They sent it hoping that whoever found it would understand that despite all the catastrophes, all the near extinctions, all the impossible odds, humans were still here, still creating, still reaching out. Still surviving, Dr. Washington added quietly. Zixana stood, all six of her eyes focused intently. Professor Veldar, Dr. Washington, I believe I speak for many of us when I say that this has been enlightening. But I must ask, what should we, as educators and researchers, take away from this? How should we approach humanity going forward? Veldar considered the question carefully, his skin cycling through thoughtful patterns. I think we need to fundamentally reconsider how we understand survival itself. For most species in the galaxy, survival is about finding optimal conditions and maintaining them. Stability, predictability, safety, these are our values. But humans, Dr. Washington continued, we come from a world that never let us have those things for long. We learned that stability is temporary, that safety is an illusion, that the only constant is change. So we built a civilization around adaptation, innovation, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. And now we're part of your galaxy, she said, spreading her arms wide. We're not going to change who we are. We're not going to stop seeing problems as challenges to overcome. We're not going to accept that's just how things are as an answer when lives are at stake. Veldar nodded. So my recommendation to the galactic academic community is this: study humans, yes. Document their methods, analyze their decision-making, understand their psychology. But more importantly, learn from them. Because the galaxy is vast and ancient, and we've grown comfortable in our understanding of what's possible. Humans remind us that possible is a flexible concept. A young Vrelic student in the back rows raised a tentative arm. But Professor, isn't there a danger in this? If we all start thinking like humans, won't we all become reckless? Won't we lose the careful, methodical approach that has served the galaxy well? That's a fair concern, Dr. Washington acknowledged. And honestly, the galaxy probably doesn't need 7 billion more humans. What the galaxy needs is balance. You need species that think carefully and plan meticulously. But you also need species that look at careful plans and say, that's great, but what if we need to improvise? She grinned. Think of it this way, humans are your emergency backup plan. We're the species you call when everything else has failed, when the protocols don't work, when the situation calls for someone crazy enough to try the impossible. And we'll try it, she added. Because that's what survivors do. We try. Veldar pulled up one final recording, a news broadcast from Earth, dated just 3 days ago. The image showed a young human girl, no more than 8 years old, standing in front of a destroyed building. A natural disaster had struck her city, an earthquake, by the looks of it. A reporter was interviewing her. You must have been very scared, the reporter said gently. The little girl nodded. I was. But my teacher taught us what to do. She said, when things get scary, remember, you're a survivor. Your job is to stay calm, stay smart, and stay alive. And then help others do the same. And did you? The reporter asked. The girl nodded again. I helped my little brother get out. And then I helped the neighbors dig out Mrs. Chen from the next building. Because that's what survivors do. We help each other survive. The recording ended. The lecture hall was absolutely silent. She's 8, Dr. Washington said softly. 8 years old, and she already understands what took me years of graduate education to articulate. Because it's not just taught in schools, it's taught at home, in stories, in the way humans talk about their past and their future. It's cultural bedrock. Veldhar's skin settled into a steady, warm gold, the color of hope and respect. Colleagues, I began this presentation by saying we'd been asking the wrong questions about humans. We asked, why are they so reckless, when we should have asked, how did they survive? We asked, why don't they follow protocols, when we should have asked, what have they experienced that made protocols seem inadequate? But the most important question, he continued, is this: what happens now? We have a species in our galactic community that fundamentally refuses to accept defeat. That sees every obstacle as surmountable, every problem as solvable, every crisis as just another Tuesday. What does that mean for all of us? Dr. Washington smiled, that genuine, warm human smile that had become less unsettling to the audience over the past 2 days. It means you're stuck with us. For better or worse, humanity's here. We're going to keep solving your impossible problems, breaking your unbreakable rules, and surviving your unsurvivable situations. We're going to be annoying and inspirational in equal measure. And in 1,000 years, Veldhar added, when someone asks what happened when humanity joined the galactic community, when they study this period of history, do you know what every lesson will end with? He paused, letting the moment build, his skin pulsing with that knowing amber. Survivors, he said simply. Because whether we like it or not, whether we planned for it or not, humanity has already changed us. They've shown us that survival isn't just about avoiding death, it's about choosing life, over and over again, no matter the odds. Professor Krell rose to his full, imposing height. Then perhaps, he rumbled thoughtfully, we should stop trying to understand why humans survive, and start learning how to survive alongside them. Now you're getting it, Dr. Washington said with a laugh. Veldhar deactivated the holographic displays. Thank you all for attending. Dr. Washington and I will be available for questions, and we'll be publishing our full research findings next cycle. But I'll leave you with one final thought. His skin cycled through every color in the Korvathian emotional spectrum: fear, hope, wonder, respect, concern, and finally settling on determined orange. Earth is a death world. Every species from Earth is, by galactic standards, absurdly resilient and adaptable. But humans are the only species from Earth that also developed sapience, technology, and the ability to consciously choose survival over and over again. They're not just survivors by chance, they're survivors by choice. And now they're here, he continued. They're our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends. They're teaching our children that giving up isn't an option. They're showing our scientists that impossible is just a dare. They're reminding our civilization that we're all survivors too, we've just forgotten it because we haven't needed to remember. Dr. Washington stepped forward one last time. My ancestors used to say, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Well, I'm standing here, light years from Earth, surrounded by aliens who've become friends, working to build a future where all our species can thrive together. I think I'm living up to that legacy. And I think, she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, that we're just getting started. Because humans have only been in space for a century. We've only been part of the galactic community for 12 years. We're still figuring out what's possible out here among the stars. So buckle up, she finished. Because if Earth's history has taught us anything, it's that the best survivors are the ones who adapt. And humanity is very, very good at adapting. The lecture hall erupted in a cacophony of sounds, some species applauding, others expressing appreciation in their own ways. Veldhar's skin glowed with satisfaction as he watched his colleagues process everything they'd learned. A then next professor approached the podium, her chitinous plates clicking thoughtfully. "Dr. Washington, may I ask, do humans ever regret this constant struggle? Do you ever wish you'd evolved on an easier world?" Dr. Washington considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to come from a planet that didn't try to kill us every few thousand years. But then I remember something my grandmother told me. She said, easy doesn't make you strong. Easy doesn't make you creative. Easy doesn't make you appreciate what you have." She looked around at the assembled aliens. "We're not easy. We're difficult, complicated, stubborn, and probably more than a little insane by your standards. But we're also loyal, determined, creative, and very good at keeping people alive. I think the galaxy has room for both, the careful planners and the crazy improvisers. The beings who know when to follow the rules and the beings who know when to break them. Besides," she added with a wink, "someone has to keep things interesting." As the crowd began to disperse, small groups forming to discuss the presentation, Veldhar noticed something remarkable. Species that normally kept to themselves were talking to each other, sharing ideas, debating possibilities. A Peltharian was deep in conversation with a Gordanian, discussing agricultural techniques. A young Vrelix was asking a Korvathian professor about incorporating human case studies into their curriculum. And in the corner, the 8-year-old human girl from the video, or one just like her, was there in spirit. Her simple statement echoing in the minds of beings across 47 species, "That's what survivors do. We help each other survive." Veldhar's skin pulsed with contentment. Maybe humans were exactly what the galaxy needed. Not because they had all the answers, but because they refused to stop asking questions. Not because they were fearless, but because they were afraid and tried anyway. Not because survival came easily to them, but because they'd made survival into an art form, a science, a philosophy, and a way of life. The symposium had started with a simple question: why does every lesson about Earth end with the word survivors? But it had ended with a much more important answer: because survival is never the end of the story. It's just the beginning. And for humanity, the story was just getting started.